The first Christmas after our daughter was born, we flew from Saskatoon to Vancouver, where Sandra's parents lived. But we had to drive 400 kilometers down from northern Saskatchewan first. And it was a snowstorm. It was a big snowstorm. And I can remember this kind of temporary relief when we were able to follow the plow for about 80 kilometers before they turned off. But the anxiety of driving through a storm with a 9-month-old is still with me, as is the complete joy when we finally pulled into the driveway of the home where we were staying in Saskatoon. I can still picture that driveway and in that house in my memory. The creators of the assigned weekly lectionary readings chose these final verses, which Roxanne read for us from the book of Zephaniah, because in the ancient tradition of the church, the third Sunday of Advent is called Joy Sunday. We have different readings, and they all relate to rejoicing. But I don't think Zephaniah is what the lectionary creators assumed. At first reading, or hearing this morning, you might think, well, this is the joy of a Christmas homecoming. Friends and family are pouring into the house, filled with that smell and aroma of a turkey baking in the oven and a decorated Christmas tree with lights greeting them. It might be the joy of relatives coming home from a long distance, or the university or college student arriving home after the end of exams. But if you go back in Zephaniah, you quickly discover that the prophet has been forecasting a global disaster right up to verse 13 of chapter 3, before launching into this proclamation of rejoicing at being home. In Zephaniah's understanding, the world has gone to hell in a handbasket, and the odds of recovery are slim at best. And as contemporary mystic Richard Rohr says, I regret that there has been a massive loss of hope in the Western world. Things are bad and getting worse, and no one has any hope of recovery soon. Zephaniah would agree heartily. Barbara Brown Taylor was once heralded by Time magazine as one of the 12 greatest preachers in the English language. And I've met Barbara a couple of times over the years, and she's always pushing the boundaries. She loved to do something unusual, something a bit out of the ordinary for her continuing education time. Like I remember once, I think she did a hike through a desert. But as an Anglican priest in the southern United States, she came to hate church, or at least she came to hate what church demanded of her as a priest. And she left. She left the ministry for a university teaching position. But it was a quote from Taylor which kind of filled my mind this week, all week, when she says, "It is in the wilderness, in the empty-handed, I give up surrender, that joy is most likely to occur." Joy is most likely to occur when you're at the end of your rope, when you're out of energy and enthusiasm and perhaps even life. When you've wandered around and around and you've never quite found your way home, and you feel like you're in a wilderness, that joy, Taylor says, is most likely to occur. I'm still trying to get my head around it, but I think Zephaniah would agree. Only when the pandemic seems endless and starts its fourth and its fifth wave, when the normalcy of life seems like a pipe dream, do we open ourselves to that real possibility that joy could occur. And again, it's not that joy of sitting down at a feast on Christmas with great friends and family and thanking God for our immense blessings. This is the joy of a post-pandemic life slowly beginning to return to normal, even if that exists. This is being in the wilderness, often a camping trip, canoe trip, ready to give up, and then the oasis appears. A car pulls up to take us home. The search and rescue team find you on the mountain when you've twisted your ankle. Or you walk in your door again after a health scare which has hospitalized you. Some 30 people gathered each week in Botsford Garden last summer on Wednesday evenings for worship. And as much as I would like to think it was the great reflections, or that the music was superb, which it was, most folks just wanted to see other people in the flesh. Just wanted to be in a safe place with people we hadn't seen for a year or more. And it was the joy, just the joy of being there. Am I not right, Don? Yes. The joy of having survived the wilderness of isolation. The joy of finding our way home after a global catastrophe strikes ancient Israel in 660 BCE. So one more winter storm story. I hope I'm not predicting. While I was a student minister in Vancouver, my colleague and housemate went in a car with another friend to Calgary in the winter. And it snowed heavily in the Rockies. And he, being from the Philippines and had never really seen snow before, freaked out. And so he called me when he got to Vancouver. He got out of the car, phoned me, and got on the Greyhound and came right back to Vancouver. I went down to the bus depot to meet him, and I will never forget. He got off the bus and in true papal fashion knelt down on his knees and actually kissed the soaked asphalt of downtown Vancouver. He did. After a storm, after the wilderness, after a catastrophe, we just want to go home, don't we? How many grandparents told me during those early days of the lockdown that the one thing they missed, the one thing they longed for, was to hug their grandchildren? That is joy. That is the joy which Zephaniah proclaims. Hard won after a crisis, which comes when we are at the end of our resources and must simply let God intervene with a joy-filled reunion, with a joy-filled restoration. Joy, real joy, comes for God and for us when war between nations ends, when crops succeed, when carbon emissions are reduced, when we move towards reconciliation with the indigenous people of this land, when there are no more need for food banks, when refugee camps are empty around the world. And then the world will know such a time of joy as we have never known before. And Zephaniah, despite all the harsh reality that he lived through and that he was living in the moment that he heard these words, hears a word from God, which firmly and resolutely says, "Sing aloud, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. I will bring you home." Thanks be to God. Amen.